On page 154 of Survive, Dr. John Taylor requests Mr. Jake Daniels, who most of us are already acquainted with, to tell him which city the person of interest hails from. And of course, by the person of interest, I mean Professor Wilhelm Gutenberg, who the sniper shooter John Silverstein has been trying to assassinate. Munich City Max Vorstadt, replied Jake. Then the author tells us that this man glances at his wristwatch and replies, "We are behind schedule." So this had me thinking a little louder. Doesn't it come as a surprise to you that clocks run clockwise and not counterclockwise? I mean, it's not that someone just woke up in the morning and decided that clocks must tick clockwise without a reason. This cannot be explained without talking about how the tilt of the Earth's axis determines where the sun appears in the sky. Welcome to my channel. My name is Victor, and those of us who've been here long enough know me as the author of a series going by the title The File Soldier. First off, I'll start explaining what's a sundial is. A sundial is a device that tells the time of the day when direct sunlight shines with respect to the position of the sun in the sky. It consists of a flat plate called the dial and something else called the gnomon, a long thin rod or other objects with a sharp tip which casts a shadow onto the dial. As the sun appears to move through the sky, the shadow aligns with the different hour lines which are marked on the dial to indicate the time of the day. But this doesn't answer the question why the clock ticks clockwise, does it? I guess not. But here you go. And this will confirm why I believe civilization might have started in the north. Where I live, that is along the equator, the sun rises from the east and sets due west. During summer in the northern hemisphere, the sun rises north of east and sets north of west. It is high in the sky at noon. So let's stop for a moment and think about that. We have the sundial that appears like so. So let's reconstruct the Earth's geometry in space. At the equator, I reiterate, the sun rises due east and sets due west. As you move northward, the arc the sun takes in the sky goes further and further south and no longer goes directly overhead. That means it's almost always south of you. Look at it this way. If at the equator it's to your left and above your head to your right as you walk to the north, the sun's arc dips behind you and behind you is south. So in the northern hemisphere, if you are ever facing the sun, you will never be facing north. Never. Evidence to that is simple, and I'll start with a question. Where does moss grow on trees in the northern hemisphere? 5 seconds for that. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It's in the north. In the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite of that. You will face the sun in the northern direction, so they grow moss in the south where there is no direct sunlight. So when you observe the gnomon, you'll realize that when it's illuminated by the sun, it casts a shadow on the dial and on these numbers that you see on the dial. But one thing should be clear, that you will need a different sundial for every different latitude on the Earth's surface. So picture this. If the sun rises in the east, as it does, the gnomon casts its shadow like so, in the clockwise direction as shown. Now this had me thinking, how possible could it be to make a clock whose hands remain still but the numbers on its dial rotate instead? Anyways, as we wrap our heads around that, let's move to the scene where Professor Gutenberg is flown down to Max Vorstadt in the state of Bavaria. So we proceed. Amanda's swift proposals had audited emotional accounts in my mind and left them unbalanced. She was a woman torn between duty and desire. "Well," said Jake, "I did not know you have soft spots for squeams. You can't afford weakness when enemies are elusive. I can take care of myself." "By any means, Mr. Taylor," said Jake, "but let's talk about what I want." Professor Villain requests we fly him home right away. That goes to me. An associate like myself would be employed in 100 ways if he bore the trouble. My mind was thus enough sacrifice in pursuance of the naughtiest secret of this conspiracy. If you will excuse me, Mr. Daniels, I said, what's Professor Gutenberg's hometown? Munich City, Max Vorstadt, replied Jake, taking a dash and glancing at his wristwatch. We are behind schedule. I love sex, gambling, and coach surfing. The man was corrupt. His eyes locked onto mine. Subconsciously, I beheld the steam of the eyes of a gentleman accustomed to sustaining himself within a means that was neither honest nor appealing. Pardon me, gentlemen, I said, but it would be so kind if you allowed me to remain in Berlin at this time and day. Our eyes locked again. Clairvoyant mind sensing his negation, I essayed for the helicopter. No, Mr. Taylor, he said, stopping short in his trot back to the chopper. With all due respect, he appeared unhinged and emotional. Reluctantly, I gave up. If I didn't, they would find me. Like an insect, they would tear me down into pieces. For rogue members, that's how cheap life could be. The best of our species failed in blooming, he said. Now let's move it. My excuse to remain in Berlin having been squashed, I told Amanda and to leave for Munich by the helicopter and that I would call her later in the day upon my arrival. I drew her cell phone, tossed it back to her and hopped into the helicopter. The incredible arousal I had derived from my little encounter with her seemed to fetter my legs. 222 154, she shouted, waved and signaled me with her right hand that she expected my call. That set me on fire. Without that assurance, I would go nuts. Her neck was instant fuel to my emotional combustion. Sparks of cravings for her ignited and burnt me like bush fire. I could only afford a thumbs-up gesture, not a word. But rather unperturbed, she walked away without turning back. She had robbed me of my heart, body and soul. Like a ghost, she had first appeared to me in the presence of the subject with whom I was to associate, and like a ghost, she had faded away from the helicopter into which the same subject awaited me. So that marks the end of today's episode. Please hit this subscribe button below to support this channel. Otherwise, goodbye.